Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I'm Vince D'Addario. That's Brian Driscoll, and we are here for our normal Monday show. We are eventually going to get to the defensive line and our thoughts on the defensive line, where they're going to be, what they're going to do, and all that fun stuff. But obviously, as we were getting ready for the show, we had some breaking news that, of course, we need to discuss and we need to address and all of that stuff. And, this was news to us as well. I mean, this is all brand new information. And so we are digesting it along with the rest of you. That news that the Notre Dame PR department just put out on social media is that Charles Jagasaw is injured. He injured. It's an upper body injury. Specifically, Brian, you want to get into the details, you can, but it's an upper body injury that's going to keep him out for the season. Also, Marty Auer was also a part of that announcement, so we'll put that in there as well, that he is also going to be out with an ACL tear, and both are expected to have surgery here this week, and obviously not good for the outlook of the season for either one of these guys. But Charles Jagasaw being the starting left tackle is the news that we are going to discuss here.
Yeah, Vince, and I was still finishing up writing as you were saying that. And
okay.
I don't know if you said this, but did you say that he is out for the year?
Yes,
I
did say that.
Out for the year.
I didn't say the specific injury because I don't remember exactly what it was, but I know it was an upper body injury.
Yeah, it was just reading directly from Notre Dame, right pectoralis muscle in his shoulder.
So, yeah, okay.
They said once his surgery is complete, he will miss the season. So that's a big blow for Notre Dame, obviously. I mean, let's state the obvious, right? This is
right
for Notre Dame. And Charles Jagasaw was expected to be your starting left tackle. And I don't care if your starting left tackle is projected to be a redshirt freshman or a redshirt sophomore or a sixth-year senior.
Nope.
When you lose your starting, left tackle, that's a big blow. And Notre Dame's going to have to find some answers. And there are some there. The question is okay, well, what does this do for the overall makeup of the offensive line? We'll dive into that. But the biggest thing is, Vince, let's talk about Jagasaw first. This is a blow for the team, but it's also a blow for Jagasaw. I mean, He's going to miss a year of development in a very important year for development. And that's big. I mean, you have a 5-star kid, 6'7", 330, massive young man, talented young man, and he goes out in not even through the first week of fall camp and he goes down, and it's a big blow for him. So he's gonna miss what was a very important part of his development. And now that doesn't mean he's not going to be the player we thought he was going to be or any of that. It just means, it slows down his development.
Sure.
Does this mean he can get back for maybe the postseason, whether that's to be practicing or playing? I don't know the answer to that, obviously, but Notre Dame said he's out for the year. Maybe that changes as they get in there and do some work. I don't have an answer to that either. So like I said, we'll do some diving into that. I don't want to presume that we have information that we don't. I just don't know what this injury means.
Yeah.
In regard to what I mean, is he going to be back for the spring? Like, I really don't know the answers to that, but I do know that for Charles, this is a big loss because it's a big year of development. And for Notre Dame, it means you're going to have to go with someone that you don't believe is your best left tackle to be your left tackle this season.
Sure.
The good news, Vince, is they've recruited the position pretty well.
Yeah.
But you already had some uncertainty at left tackle because Charles is a redshirt freshman with one career start. Now there's even greater uncertainty, and this now potentially could impact 2 positions, depending on what Notre Dame decides to do with the right tackle spot. But I will say this, Vince, because I want to be honest about where this is, but also, talk about some positives. And look, here is a positive from this. There's no positives for the injury. I'm more referring to the timing.
Sure.
The fact that it happened not even a full week into fall camp means you have almost a month to kind of get prepared to play without Charles. That is a much... Like, if this is going to happen, and
right.
It sucks no matter when it happens. It's a blow no matter when it happens. But if you know it's going to happen, and it's going to happen in fall camp, getting it done early in the first week of fall camp is huge. I mean, if you think about it, Vince, so Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, yesterday was the first day of full pads. Today's only the second day of full pads, and they're already going to be working with whoever their next left tackle is going to be, or at least figuring out who that's going to be. So,
and I think they said it happened on August 3rd, which was the day that we were there in the like at the first part. I think is what it said.
That would be Saturday. The
Was
3rd was Saturday.
So
yeah.
we were there
the
Saturday?
second. We were there on the second.
Okay, we were there on Friday. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, they've had a couple of days to digest this too, and they've had a couple of days to kind of figure out what the plan is, at least the starting plan moving forward. And so this isn't something that just happened this morning. They've had, I want to say, at least a practice, because I believe they practiced today. So they've had at least a practice to start working on whatever answer or whatever potential answers that there is going to be. And you're right. It makes a lot of sense. Well, I shouldn't say it makes a lot of sense. That's not the right terminology. Having it happen when it did gives a good amount of time, because they're not even in, prep for the first week. I mean, they're
still well over a week away from that.
They're
a week and a half away from that.
I mean, they're still doing stances and starts, and they're doing drill work, and they're doing all these different things that you do during fall camp. I mean, they're a ways away yet from even game planning for Texas A&M. So, you've got some time. This didn't happen in the middle of the season where you've got 3 practices to get somebody else ready. You've got some time. Again, there's nothing good about this situation as far as losing your left tackle. We're not going to sugarcoat that for you. We were all extremely excited about Charles Jagasaw and what he was going to be able to do on the left side, and he was going to be, an integral part of what this offensive line was going to be, and he had that spot locked down, period. I mean, that was his spot. And so now questions, right? We have questions. I'm sure they have more answers than questions, but it's not just plug and play either, I don't think.
Yeah.
I believe there are multiple options depending on which route they want to take, or if they want to test out each route, see which one works best.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got some time to do that.
And I'll say this, there's a lot of people kind of freaking out in the chat about this, and they're comparing this to 2021. And this is the point that we're talking about. Like in 2021, Blake Fisher got hurt in the first half of the first game of the year. And they spent the next month trying to figure out who their starting left tackle was going to be.
They went through 4.
They went to Michael Carmody, and then he got hurt, and he didn't play well. They went to Tosh Baker. He didn't play well. Then he got hurt. And then eventually they went to Joe Alt. And it took into game 6 or 7 before they eventually went to Joe Alt, right? Because they didn't have time to figure out who that was going to be. They had to kind of put someone in there and get ready to go win a football game. The whole point of what we're talking about now, guys, is that this is completely different than the 2021 situation, because they have so much more time.
We got time.
And that's the biggest difference. Now, we don't know if there's a Joe Alt on the roster who can eventually step in and solidify things. We don't know what that answer is going to be. And we'll talk about here next what we think Notre Dame might do and what we would do, right? I mean, we'll give that opinion as well. But this is a different situation than 2021 because of the timing. And that's the exact reason that we brought that up. I've said this before, Vince. You never want to lose a guy in season, ever. And Notre Dame has just lost a guy in season. If you're going to lose a guy in season, you want it to be as early as possible, so that way you have time to prepare.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Notre Dame is going to have to figure out what they're going to do, because they have to find some answers. I think it was like 2020. It was 2015 too, right? I believe they lost Jerron Jones in the first week of fall camp. Remember that? And all of a sudden you gave Jerry Tillery a month to practice, and eventually Jerry takes over and he becomes a starting nose tackle, right? I mean, so you had time to prepare to do that. They're going to have time to prepare for Charles Jagasaw, which is in an imperfect situation is an ideal scenario, because now you have time. Because let's say they decide to make a move. We're going to put this guy over at left tackle. And after a week, it's like, okay, this isn't happening. This isn't the guy. Well, now they still have 2.5 weeks at least to put somebody else out there before they have to go play a football game. So
yeah,
it is not good. It's not ideal. It's not like, don't worry, their line's going to be phenomenal still. This is a blow. I don't know what their offensive line is going to look like. This took the biggest question mark on the team, in my opinion. I said it in the show. Takes the biggest question mark on the team, and it makes it an even bigger question mark.
Yeah.
And then also just for Charles, specifically to Charles Vince, and next we'll talk about what comes next For Charles specifically, this is a blow because I never like when linemen have shoulder injuries. That always makes me nervous when guys have shoulder injuries.
Sure.
And so, we'll see how he bounces back from this. But yeah, it's a tough blow. But I mean, timeline-wise, if he got hurt on the 3rd, that means this is going to be the second practice in which they have done it because they practiced yesterday. Because they will practice on Sundays in fall camp.
Gotcha. Well, and they practice Sundays during the school year too.
Well, they do like some walkthrough stuff. I don't know that they did the night practices last year like they did 2 years.
Okay. I guess that's what I probably remembering.
Yeah, they did that 2 years ago. I don't know that they did that last year. But the point being, you've got time. They've got time to figure out the answers, which means they can experiment a little bit. Where if you get a guy hurt like Blake Fisher did, you just kind of got to roll with it. And okay, let's see. Hopefully this is our next in line. So hopefully he's good. And then you don't find out for a couple games before you're like, he ain't the guy.
And that's tough. That's a tough spot to be in. I mean, they went through 4 total left tackles that season and eventually obviously settled on a future All-American. But if they knew he was going to be an All-American, he would have been the first man in. I mean, they had to figure it out. He's a true freshman. I mean, you kind of had to go through the list, right? Well,
I mean, looking back, he probably should have played a lot sooner. But
they knew they wanted him on the field because that's why they gave him the tight end number and they were using him a lot.
The light didn't just go on the week of the Virginia Tech game. We always talk about this, but that's a different conversation for a different day. So, Vince, let's talk about what's next.
Yeah.
Because they got to find answers, right? Like, look, we can wallow in self-pity about Charles Jagusah going down and just cancel the season and call Texas A&M and say, listen, guys, we're just going to forfeit the first game because – we can't block your tackles, your defensive ends. And so we're just going to chalk that up as an L. We don't want anybody else to get hurt, and we're just going to get ready for Northern Illinois, right? I mean, you can do that, or you can say, okay, you got to go out and win a football game. A&M's going to have some injuries at some point in time, moving forward here as well. So we'll see kind of how it plays out. But now it's like as coaches, like, man, it sucks. You sit – this is how it goes in meeting rooms, Vince. I know you've been in these.
Yep.
You kind of, for about 10 minutes, you just like, man, 5-10 minutes, like this freaking sucks. Like this just blows. You feel for the kid. You hurt for the kid. You wonder what you're going to do. And then it's like, all right, what do we do? Let's figure it out. Let's find some answers. And that's what we're going to do right now.
To be honest with you, it's kind of what you and I did. we saw the news and we're like, God, man, that really sucks. And then you're like, hey, I got to write an article. And you're getting in there and you're doing your thing. And I'm going over my head like, what? Okay. So yes, this is terrible. This is awful news. Okay. Where do they go from here? What do they do? And so we did the exact same thing to be out. Well, I mean, we're coaches, so I mean, it makes sense, but it's a cliche, no doubt about it, but it is kind of a next man up situation.
Yeah.
And so they've got to figure out who that next man is. Now, there's a couple different routes that they can go with this, right, Brian? I mean, you obviously have a battle going on, or in theory, there's a battle going on at right tackle between Tosh Baker and Emil Wagner. Now, it had appeared that Emil Wagner had kind of taken the lead in that battle. So do you just take the guy who was a possibility for right tackle and move him to left tackle? Do you take Emil Wagner, move him to left tackle, and keep Tosh at right tackle? I think that one of those two scenarios would be the first thing that you talk about, right? I mean, that's the first.
Yeah. I mean, your first thought is your two tackles are now Emil and Tosh.
Sure.
The question, however, is which one do you move over?
Exactly.
Like, that's the question. And now I'll give you what my guess is, but then I'll also tell you what may be some other things that this staff has to consider. If it was up to me, I would not if it's up to me. If I'm guessing what I think they'll do, it's moving Emil Wagner to left tackle. That is what I think that they'll do. Now, that Emil has all the tools to be a left tackle. He's long, he's athletic, he's got strong hands, he can handle himself. That would be my guess as to what I think that they'll do. But there's some things that you need to think about if you're Notre Dame. Number one being Emil's never played left tackle in college. He's going to his third year, and he's only really played right tackle. Emil still has to show himself a little bit as a pass blocker. Pass blocking has been the area where he's needed the most work, from technically speaking, but then also because of his weight, right? So do you move him over to left tackle knowing that that's a bit of an issue and just say, hey, we got to teach this guy and get this guy going and hey, we got to figure it out, right? How comfortable are you with where he's at? Now, my thought is, Vince, he doesn't get put into the starting lineup day one of fall camp if he hasn't shown himself well at the end of spring and summer practices, right? I mean, that's the case. So
Agreed.
that's why I say if they're comfortable with him as a pass blocker, then I would say just move Emil over to the left side, and you just slide Tosh into the right tackle spot.
Sure.
The counter to that, however, is Tosh has played left tackle. Tosh has started games at left tackle at Notre Dame.
True.
Tosh is a little bit more dependable than Emil as a pass blocker based on the past. They got to evaluate if they still feel that way now. I don't know the answer to that. So I'm not saying that's what I would do. I'm not saying it's what I think they're going to do. I think it's something you need to consider. Can Emil, who's just starting to get comfortable at right tackle, go over to left and say, well, it's the same thing? No, it's completely flipping everything you've been doing. You flip your stance, you flipped your hand play, your line of sight completely changes. Like, it's something that's just right in the middle of fall camp is going to take an adjustment period for Emil Wagner.
Well, and not to mention the fact that you were playing next to a guy that you knew was going to be the left guard or the right guard, and now you're going to be playing next to a bit of a timeshare, at least during camp, because they haven't decided who the left guard is going to be. And so you've worked this entire time, okay, getting the communication down with the same guy over and over again, and that's part of it, right? I mean, communication is a huge part of being on the offensive line, and now you're going to move to a spot where there's some indecision about who is going to be working next to you. So now you're going to have to work on communication with two different guys,
right?
Over you know what I mean? So that's also something to consider too.
So I mean, I'm very curious to see what they do. And it wouldn't shock me if they give both of them some reps at left tackle. And
sure.
I think that would be smart.
See who takes to it the best.
Yeah,
yes, for sure.
Yes. Yeah. And just see if Emil can do it, but don't wait for 2 weeks and then you realize Emil can't play left-handed. Right. And then you move Tosh over. I would give them both some reps right now at left tackle and just see who's most comfortable there, with the thought that if everything goes the way that you hope it does as a staff, Emil makes an easy, smooth transition and Tosh just slides in a right tackle. I think that's the hope right now, at least for now. Now, there's some other things that need to happen, Vince, or at least be considered. The number 2 left tackle in fall camp is Anthony Knapp. I don't think Anthony Knapp is physically ready to play right now. So I don't think this is just slide Anthony Knapp into the first team. That's not how it works in college football. Just because you're the number 2 doesn't mean you're the next guy in at that particular position, right? If the right guard goes down, it doesn't matter. Whoever loses the battle between Coogan and Spindler is probably just going to slide in over at right tackle. That's just a right guard. That's the reality of it. So then there's some other options Notre Dame has to consider. One of them is Sullivan Absher, who was the number 2 left tackle behind Jagasol in the bowl game. And you could now, when I say Sullivan Absher, I don't think Sullivan Absher at left tackle is what I'm looking at. To me, it would be more of, does Sullivan Absher now go over to right tackle? Maybe you play him a left tackle, see what I can do, but I just don't think Sullivan's a natural left tackle. You could say, hey, look, he's playing guard right now. He's still playing left-handed. Let's kick him out and give him some reps at left tackle. I would do that in some one-on-one situations to just see kind of who looks the best. But I would also think that you need to consider maybe doing this to give him some work at right tackle to just solidify the tackle depth chart. Because right now, the way that it looks, the way that the depth chart looks, it's based on where guys have been playing in fall camp. It's Emil and Tosh at tackle. Whoever's left, whoever's right. Behind that, it's 2 true freshmen, Gerby Lambert and Anthony Knapp, right? Like, I don't know that you want to go into the season with one more injury and we have to play a freshman. So this is also partly why you have to think about having Sullivan Absher start to get some tackle reps right now. I think that's the other part of it, Vince, is you have to consider. It's like, this isn't just about who's your new left starter. This is also about, okay, we need to rethink the entire depth chart because we now need to be prepared. Well, what if there's another injury at tackle? Who's the next guy in? And say, yeah, we would love to give Sullivan a chance to start at that left guard spot. But unless he's right now like, dude, I think he's as good as those other 2 guys, you may need to put that on pause for now and at least sort of, even if it's just cross-training him a little bit, you at least need to do that and see kind of how he does over there. That would be another thing that I would look at, Vince, as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard a lot of good things about Sully and what he's been able to do, and even Marcus Freeman has brought him up you know, and about, you know, he's kind of ascending and all
They
of these
love
different.
him.
They love him, absolutely.
But there's a reason they moved him to guard.
Right, for sure.
You know what I mean? That's the position we always felt he was best at.
Right.
And a position where they were hoping that he would battle for that left guard job. But I mean, but the point is, Vince, they put him behind those veteran guys to battle. That's something. Yes. They put him in a position to battle a couple 10-plus game starters. That tells you a little bit about what they think about Sullivan Absher.
After Sullivan Absher, then you're looking at the two true freshmen. And you've got Anthony Knapp, who you kind of discussed already. And then you've got, you know, Gerby Lambert. And obviously a lot of publicity for Gerby coming in and rightfully so. Yeah, don't get me wrong, rightfully so. But, you know, where is he in his development to actually be on the field for a team that is a potential playoff bound team, right? I mean, this isn't, you know, a team where, you know, this year is kind of a throwaway and you just want to get a guy some experience. This is a team where there's a lot of high expectations for this offense and for this team. And so is Gerby Lambert at a point in his development where you can kind of throw him in there and see what happens? You know, I think they're going to give him an opportunity, you know, to see where he's at, give him a chance to battle a little bit. I don't know that they're going into like this morning thinking Gerby Lambert's our starter at left tackle. I don't think that's the thought process. At least I wouldn't
Probably
think
not.
So. But I think it would be, hey,
or
man,
right.
let's get this kid some reps and see kind of where he stacks up.
Yeah. You have to. I mean, you have to. Like, look, there's some other things they're going to do. They'll probably put Tai Chan out to tackle and let him get some reps. He's not the answer. We've seen that last fall. We saw that in the spring. We saw this. He's an inside guy. He doesn't have the athleticism, in my opinion, to play tackle. If they have to play him, that's a problem. There's some other guys people are going to mention, you know, can Billy Schrouth play you want to make these moves where you do at least damage to as many positions as possible.
You don't need it to be a domino effect.
That's the other reason you maybe consider, do you move Tosh over to left tackle? Because now your other four spots aren't being affected by this. Right. I mean, those are things you have to at least consider. All things are on the table right now, in my opinion. Yeah. And the reason Anthony Knapp was at left tackle is because Tosh can't play two positions at once. Emil can't play two positions at once. As I said earlier, the reality is when Charles Jagasaw goes down, one of those two guys is the easy answer to who's going to be the left tackle.
Right.
And that's what they're going to work on. But in regard to Gerby Lambert specifically, you have to say, okay, I mean, if you're Marcus Freeman and Mike Denbrock, you're pulling Joe Rudolph into your office and saying, you now need to put the Gerby Lambert development plan on overdrive.
Yeah, it's in fast forward now.
You could take your time with Gerby and just let him learn in a natural process 3 days ago. Mm-hmm. Friday, when we were there, you didn't need Gerby Lambert to necessarily be that guy right now because of how well Emil had ascended. Like Emil's ascension and what the staff has said about him to us, privately and publicly, says, okay, I think they're good at right tackle. You don't have to play Gerby now. You only play him if he's ready. Mm-hmm. Now it's figured out, Joe, right? Like figure it out. You got an elite 6'7", 320-pound, 36. I was told this 36-inch arms, just insane arm length. Athletic kid, figure it out, right? Like you got to figure it out. Like I remember one of the best lessons I heard as a coach, Mike Donnelly calls me in. We're moving a linebacker, Chris Brown, over to fullback. And he's like, this kid's really athletic. He was 6'1", 230, really athletic kid, didn't know how to play fullback. And this was what Coach Donnelly and Coach Goff told me. Get him ready. All right. What? How? It's my first year as a coach. Get him ready. It's your job. Figure it out. And so, you know, what I did was I'd meet with him extra time after practice. We'd get on the board. I'd have him. You spend time with him before practice, after practice. I mean, there's a lot. You spend more film work with him. You give him directives on what he needs to be looking at film. And by the time we got to our first full game, Chris Brown was ready to help us out. And, you know, we had the best season in school history. So, and we were a running football team. So that's what Joe Rudolph figured out, right? But you've got to get 76 ready to help us this year. That simple as that. He needs to be developed to be that next guy if there's a need there. Yeah. He figured out. And I understand that, you know, right now, technically Anthony Knapp's ahead of him, but if you're going to go that route, no, I'm sorry. Get the 6'7". You don't put the 280 plus pound kid that's 6'3.5" as your number 2 left tackle. You just don't do that because he's more advanced. It's your job as the offensive line coach to figure out how to get your 6'7", 320-pound, long-armed, athletic 5-star kid ready to go. Mm-hmm. And if you can't figure out how to get him ready, at least being your 2 deep, then maybe you're not the answer. I mean, I'm just saying, right? So, unfortunately, I think this forces Gerby to have to grow up a lot faster than Charles had to grow up. They didn't need Charles last year. They didn't. They had Joe Alt. They had Blake Fisher. They had Emil Wagner. They had Tosh Baker. They were solid 2 deep of guys that were talented and sophomores or older. Now you're in a situation where it's like, hey, brother, sorry, man, but you gotta go into tomorrow's practice with a whole different attitude than the one you had the day before. And I'm saying that to Gerby Lambert. I'm saying that to Anthony Knapp, and I'm saying that to Joe Rudolph. If I'm Mike Denbrock and Marcus Freeman. Hey, man, you got to go into this with a whole different attitude. Your young bucks can't afford to take a year to develop now. You got to get Gerby Lambert ready to play.
Yeah.
You got to get him ready to play, whether that's left tackle, right tackle. My thought is getting Gerby ready to play right tackle would be my thought. That way, just because that's what he's done. But if you feel like, hey, figure it out.
Yeah.
Because this is about solidifying your entire tackle depth chart now, Vince. This isn't just about left tackle. Because if Emil's not the guy or Emil gets hurt, you probably move Tosh over there. But what do you do at right tackle if that happens? That's why I'm saying you need to get Gerby ready to go. And if he grows up quick, maybe he is a swing guy that can play left or right. But I think it's more of the veterans will be the swing guys, and then you may need to put Gerby in a right tackle. But he needs to be in your 2 deep now. And you've got to get him ready to go. It's simple as that. You've got talent there. You got to coach it up. I mean, that's the reality of it. It also puts a lot more on. You need to figure out that left guard battle maybe a little sooner than expected.
Yeah. Yes.
To your point about earlier, Vince.
Yeah. Well, and here's the very interesting part is that this happened in the middle of the season. We wouldn't know until game day what was about to happen. We're going to get a little bit of a view tomorrow because it's an open practice for the first 5 periods. And so, obviously a lot of attention is going to be on the offensive line and what they're going to be up to doing their individual drills and, things of that nature. Will we see the definitive answer? Of course not, but we might get a peek into maybe the thought process as to what they're attempting to accomplish here on August 6th, which is tomorrow, what they're thinking, like where they're at in the process. We might get a little bit of a peek into that tomorrow morning, but we'll let you know. I promise you, we will let you know tomorrow what we see.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Tomorrow's show will kick off with a practice report, and then we'll dive into the linebackers. That was the plan for tomorrow. So we'll definitely be paying attention to that. But I think we'll wrap it up with this, Vince. Andy Milton fan said it very clearly. We're going to find out a lot about Joe Rudolph this year.
Oh yeah, that was the case anyway. True. But you take away your starting left tackle, that becomes even more true, for sure. Yep. So we will see what happens, and believe me, you stay locked into Irish Breakdown, and we will keep you abreast of the situation and everything that we know. You'll know. I mean, as far as we can tell,
But can I just say one thing? This is why when people say, well, you don't really need to recruit that position that year. You know, you signed this guy last year. You don't really need that guy. This is why you always recruit good players every year. That's because this is a tough spot for Notre Dame, but there aren't a lot of teams that can literally figure out which former top 100 recruit are we going to plug in at left tackle? Because that's the conversation. Tosh was a former top 100 recruit. Emil was a former top 100 recruit. And Gerby Lambert obviously was a former top 100 recruit. There's going to be some talent there, Vince, to work with. It's just figuring out what's the best group of 5-man combination that you have. And and I remember there were some people like, why would you bring Tosh Baker back?
right now. Any more questions?
Yep.
Yeah.
You always got to be solid, strong, 2 deep, especially along the lines. And we're going to find out if they are. And so,
good point.
Joe Rudolph is either going to be a guy we're talking about. I don't know if he's the guy or a guy that we're going to say this dude needs a pay raise. One of those 2 things is going to be true by the time we get to the end of the season, I feel.
And there probably won't be a whole lot of down the middle, just saying. Hey, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends. Jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com. We had the information on there, I think, within about 7 minutes of the news coming down. We had a story up, and that's where you get your info, folks. So make sure you are a member of the boards. we are going to jump into, our anticipated topic for today, the one that we actually planned ahead for and had notes for, and the one that we are that we got
And
all the
still
notes.
very important, if
Yes.
not more so today.
Well, good point. We are going to discuss the defensive line today, Brian, and this is by far one of the strengths of this team, not only of the defense but of the entire team itself. And so we're going to kind of dive into the defensive line as a whole, and then of course we're going to get into individual players, who's going to break out, newcomers, all of that fun stuff. And I'm excited for this one because it's always fun to talk about really good players, Brian, and there is no shortage of really good players on this defensive line.
There's not. And when you look at this defensive line, Vince, and just kind of quickly relay it back to the conversation we just had, there's going to be a lot of true serum handed out to the Notre Dame offensive tackles over the next month.
Yes.
And that's a good thing. That's a very good thing, because you've got to get ready to play some very good defensive ends in the first game of the year. Very defensive lineman, first game of the year. Best way to get ready for playing against really good defensive linemen and on August 31st is to have to face really good defensive linemen every single day in practice.
And that is what this offensive line will face every single day of practice. That's
absolutely. And now we just got to find out, okay, how good are they going to be? Because like really, Vince, and as we kind of get into this first section, that's what a lot of the conversation is about is, how good really were they last year? And how good are they going to be now? And how good do they have to be?
Sure.
And it's interesting because there's a very, very big variation of opinion amongst Notre Dame fans in regard to how good was last year's defensive line. And I think part of it is because there's a lot of emphasis put on sacks and pressures without an understanding of what Notre Dame's defense is and how they are meant to generate sacks and pressures. But when you look at it, last year's defensive line, I think most people can agree on this. And I want to have the conversation be here. Instead of spending 30 minutes arguing, are they top 5 or top 10? Let's just say the vast majority of the people can argue that last year it was a top 10 defensive line. Can we in the chat and those listening at home, can we at least agree that it's certainly comfortable? We're all comfortable saying they were top 10, right? And some weeks they were top 5 and other weeks they weren't top 5. So we can say, okay, top 10. So then the question is, Vince, is that good enough? Was that good enough? Like if Notre Dame simply repeats what it was last year on the D line, is that good enough for this team to be able to go out there and play for a championship? And I think that's a fair question.
Yeah.
Or do they need, does this, and not every team has to have a top 5 defensive line to win a championship. LSU didn't in 2019, Alabama 2020 didn't. We're talking about the makeup of this Notre Dame football team. I don't think Michigan could have won last year if they didn't have a top 5 defense.
Completely agree.
They needed it. Notre Dame, I think, needs it. Even if the offense is better, the question is can they play that level? Does it need to be top 5? That's a fair question, because in certain years in the past, in 2017 and 2015, if Notre Dame had a top 10 defensive line, that team could have beat anybody. In 2012, they had a top 5 defensive line, and it still wasn't good enough because other parts of the team weren't good enough. So that's kind of the question, is not necessarily just about the D line, Vince, but my question to you is top 10, and when we say top 10, we're saying outside the top 5, is that good enough for this football team to say, okay, we are a top 10 defensive line, let's say 6 to 10, somewhere in there. Is that good enough for this football team of what we know about this team right now for them to go out there and compete for a championship? Or is it more of just a one and done, 1+1 and done type of scenario? That's the question that we have about if they simply just repeat what they were last year. If they just do what we know and what they've proven they can do.
It's funny that the way this day has shaken out from a Notre Dame news standpoint, when we first went over this about 2 hours ago, and we were kind of going over these questions, and and I was thinking, whenever we go over the outline of the show, we talk about questions and things. Of course, you think about what your answers are going to be and things like that. And 2 hours ago, my answer would have been, you know what? If they repeat what they did in 23, they'll be just fine. And they will be able to supplement what I think the offense is going to be. And I think they can go out and they could potentially be in championship discussion at that point. You know, they're going to be a playoff team. At the very least, they win one game and go on to the next round, you know, that type of thing. And they have the possibility of advancing even further. Well, in the last hour, I feel like my answer has changed slightly. Now, here's my caveat. Here's why it has changed. Now, obviously, with the news about Charles Jagasaw going down and being lost for the season, it adds even more question marks to a position group that we had question marks to begin with because they didn't have their starting five solidified yet. And we liked where things were trending. And I think you and I both felt good about the offensive line and where they definitely could end up by the end of the year and win playoffs and when it matters, right? Well, you just threw a giant curveball with the offensive line. Do I think they can still be a very good offensive line depending on how things shake down? Sure. It's a possibility. I think the percentage of certainty on that has gone down a little bit. Okay, because of what has happened, right? And so in order to cover up for some of that percentage, I feel like the defensive line needs to pick up that a little bit. Does that make sense? Like I feel like the defensive line now needs to pick up the slack a little bit for my drop in confidence of the offensive line. I would say my confidence is still very good for the offensive line. I think it'll take maybe a little bit longer to get them where they need to be. But we're talking about at the end of the season, we're talking about competing for championships in the playoffs. That's 12, 13 games from now. So much can happen. So much can change between now and then. But I feel like I'll feel a lot better if the defensive line takes another step to kind of cover up for my drop in percentage and confidence in the offensive line. So with all of that being said, do I think they need to be the same as last year? They could probably still get it done at that point, but my confidence level goes up significantly if they can take another step up and be a little bit better than they were last year.
I think that's fair. I would argue if we're talking about winning a championship, I actually think they already needed to be better than they were last year.
Okay.
I do. And especially when it comes to rushing the quarterback and playing with consistency. Like somebody in the chat said, were they a top 10 run defense last year? Well, number one, they were not a top 10 run defense last year. Al Golden doesn't care about being a top 10 run defense. He needs to be good against the run.
Sure.
But in modern football, it's like, yeah, you got to be good against the run, but I don't care about being top 10. He said that. That's not the focus. But the run defense has to get better. I would argue that the issues with the run defense last year weren't necessarily related to the defensive line. They were more second and third level related when they had those issues, right? And so when you think about the 60-yard touchdown run against Ohio State, that was a play about your corner and your safety. D-line did their job. Linebacker Maris didn't do his job on that play. Xavier Watts didn't do his job on that play. And then Cam Hart got held. But you need to be overall just better. I don't care about being top 10 against the run, but you need to be better. I did a whole show about that this summer. You got to be better. You've got to finish better at the quarterback. We've talked about that, Vince. You've got to do a better job there. Sure. You've got to take it to another level. The question for me is, I think it is that what I want to see for the defense to truly become elite, or is it more about can they still be, if they just repeat last year, is that good enough to win a championship? My answer would be if nothing else changes on the team, then no, it's not good enough. You need to be better to carry the team. If the offense improves in the manner in which we expect the offense to improve, is it good enough? Yes. And then also, how much better does the offense have to be for Notre Dame to be able to compete for championship with the D-line just being as good as it was last year?
Sure.
So a lot of that has to do with other parts that have nothing to do with the D-line. But the D-line can only control itself. we always say control the controllables, right? And the defensive line can't do anything about the linebackers, the corners, the safeties, the offensive line, the offensive coordinator, any of that kind of stuff. They can only control what they can control. And what they can control is being more disruptive, being more dynamic, and being more consistent, because this is the point that Andrew Gilmore was kind of getting at in the chat is, number one, every defensive line has bad games, right? Every single one. In some of the best defensive lines I've ever seen in my life have days where they weren't as good as they probably should have been. They do. Georgia 2021. I mean, it was one of the best defensive lines of the last 6 or 7 years. I mean, just you had first-round draft picks on the second team on that group, right? And then they come out against Alabama in the SEC title game, and they can't get after the quarterback, and Alabama rips them up on the offensive side of the ball. They lose 41-24. Everybody has those kind of days. Alabama went for 536 yards and 7.7 yards per play in that game. The most yards they gave up at any point in time prior to that game was 387 to that really good Hendon Hooker-led Tennessee team. They gave up 7.7 yards per play to Alabama that day. The highest yards per play against them previously was 4.83 by South Carolina. Everybody has bad days. But I do think that last year Notre Dame's defensive line didn't have enough of the really dominant games for me to be okay with that occasional down game, right? So that's what I say is the overall level of play needs to increase, in my opinion, in order for them to carry the team. However, if the O-line, if the offensive side becomes the unit it's capable of, and they don't miss a beat at linebacker in the secondary, I actually do think last year can be good enough. So part of me saying they need to be better, Vince, is about that they need to be better in order to make up for other areas maybe not being as good as they were last year or as good as we hope they can be. So I think that the baseline is repeat last year. If they repeat last year, they've got a chance. That's what I would say. They got a chance. They can't regress. In order for me to feel even better about this team taking a step as a program, I think the defensive line can be that. And we should expect that from them, Vince, because it's a deep group, it's a talented group, and it's a very experienced group. And there's some questions that we got to figure out, and we'll dive into those questions as we go along, Vince. But, the reality is if this defense can improve, it can be better. And then what does that mean to improve? As I said, finish at the ball better. That's the first thing that comes to mind when I think of this D-line. Finish at the ball better means two things, right, Vince? Be even better with block destruction, and holding your point of attack when need be, and then two, finishing at the ball. Get to the ball. Tackle better, right? I mean, if Riley Mills would have tackled better last year, we'd be having a completely different conversation about how good. If just that one thing about his game improves, we may actually be having a different conversation about him, because we may be talking about how well he's looking in the NFL camp that he's a part of.
Well, that's a good point.
Right?
Yeah.
But that's
so it's kind of a double-edged sword as far as like he wasn't a complete player last year.
Right.
And so he came back to become a more complete player.
Right.
And it's a double-edged sword.
He was very good last year. It's just, you got to finish better. You need to turn some of those disruptions into finished plays where you're getting TFLs and hits on the quarterback.
Yeah.
So I think that's the area where I say are those two things right there, right? Getting to the ball and all that entails, and finish better. That's because they were close, Vince. They were really, really close.
Yeah,
last year. It's just that's what you need to do.
Well, and I think we've talked about this a lot, and we're probably going to talk about it even more tomorrow when we talk about the linebackers. But I think there's been an increase in athleticism, I think, overall with this defense in general, especially the front seven. And so that will help them, I think, be put into position to make those TFLs and some of those disruptive plays behind the line of scrimmage, but they still need to complete them. We've seen over the last 2 years under Al Golden's defense, they're not having the issue getting to the ball in the backfield. They're getting to the ball, in my opinion. They're just not finishing. And so there's got to be an emphasis on finishing, I think, even more this year. But again, with that increase in athleticism up front, I think they have an opportunity to do that. We'll just have to wait and see if that comes to fruition or not. And that will have a tremendous impact, obviously, on this team and on this defense and what they are able to do. Because you and I both know, 2nd and 13 is a heck of a lot different than 2nd and 7. When you're diving into the playbook and trying to figure out what to call on 2nd down or 3rd and long as opposed to 3rd and short, all of those different things. And so, that's going to be up to this defensive line. Can they be disruptive? Can they finish the plays that they were in position to finish last year and just overall didn't finish enough of them?
And we'll get into some specifics and segments of the show that are upcoming, but obviously the edge is going to be a big part of that. More production from the edge is going to be a big part of that. And the other part of that, which again, we're just kind of previewing what's to come with the rest of the show, the backups have to be more disruptive. And to me, here's the final piece too, Vince. Especially with the news that we learned today about the offensive line, with the fact that you're playing Texas A&M, with the fact that you are having a situation where, I'm trying to think of the way to say this. You've got a lot of talent in the back end, but it's a lot of new parts. You got a new nickel. You're going to have a new Will, a new Mike. Now, the new Will is going to be a guy that's played a bunch, but he didn't play at will. And Jack Kaiser, you've got a very experienced boundary safety that's got over 2,000 snaps of college football in his career, and Rod Hurd, but 0 in a Notre Dame uniform and at that safety position, right? So, and you've got a brand new field corner. So you've got some very important parts that are missing. I think where this defense really this D-line really needs to be at its best, they need to start the season off better than they did last year. And I think that's one area where I would say, I actually think, I say you don't blame the playing Navy on things, and I'm not blaming them for anything, but I do think when you are preparing to play Navy in the first game of the year, it's 2 weeks of work from your D-line where they're not worried about getting to the quarterback and they're not worried about getting to the ball carrier per se. They're worried about eating up gaps and keeping guys off their legs and freeing up your runners. It's a little bit of a different deal when you talk about your D-line. Was there an adjustment period after that? That's a good question, since it did happen so early. So now you don't have that potential excuse. You've got to start off early, because one of the most annoying narratives for me this offseason has been the obsession of talking about the Notre Dame offensive line against the Texas A&M defensive line and how that could be a matchup that is why Notre Dame loses that game. And then nobody wants to talk about the Notre Dame defensive line against the A&M offensive line. A&M has just as many. A&M would love to have a couple of Notre Dame's backup offensive tackles right now. Like, they would be very happy with that, to play opposite Trey Zoom, right? That's just, their offensive line was a mess last year. They've also got to block the Notre Dame defensive line. And that's going to be a big part of that game, Vince, is they need to go out and have the kind of game where we can look back and say, this is why you all were talking about the wrong things all summer, because of that right there. Yes, Notre Dame's offensive line needs to figure out a way to block a really talented Texas A&M defensive line. But how's Texas A&M going to block a really good Notre Dame defensive line? If the Notre Dame defensive line doesn't play to their potential, then it becomes a problem, because you now have to figure out, okay, how do we stop this team with the best part of our defense, at least in game one, isn't playing like an elite group or a top 10 group. So even if they are just top 10, they need to be top 10 day one, where last year, Vince, I don't think they were as good in September as they were in October, November, the D-line.
Sure.
They're going to have to start a little bit faster, and I think the edge is going to be a big part of that, and the depth is going to be a big part of that.
Well, and they're going to have to start faster because the level of competition is obviously higher, or one of the reasons they have to start faster. And everything you said is absolutely accurate, but they're going to have to start faster because game one isn't Navy. Bottom line, game one isn't Navy. Game one's Texas A&M, who's a top 25 ranked team, and you're going to their place, and they're, fans are going to be going bonkers because there's 0-0, and they got a new head coach, and they got their quarterback healthy, and, go down the list of reasons for Texas A&M fans to be excited. It's there. And so the defensive line, when we're doing the post-game show on August 31st, if Notre Dame wins that game, we're going to be talking about the defensive line and the plays that they made. If they win. If they win, yes, I'm saying.
Because I don't think they can if the defensive line doesn't
play well.
Completely agree with that.
So Before we jump into some more specifics, make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, the notification bell, share with your family and friends, all the good stuff. And make sure you jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com. A lot of good discussion going to be happening over there, I have a feeling, over the next 24 to 48 hours. And of course, tomorrow we've got a live look into practice, and that's where the practice report goes, folks. So if you want that practice report, you better check out boards.irishbreakdown.com. This next part, Brian, part 2 of our defensive line discussion, we want to talk about kind of what we know and the biggest questions. And so, there's a lot of returning talent, obviously, on this team.
It's basically what we know and what we don't know, right, Vince?
Yep, absolutely.
I mean,
yeah. What we know, biggest questions, what we don't know. It is exactly right. And so, jumping into what we know first, there's a lot of returning talent here from last year's team. And as we kind of discussed in part 1, one of the reasons Riley Mills is back is he didn't probably have the season overall that he wanted. And the feedback that he got from NFL teams said, hey, go back to school, I would imagine. Or he didn't get the grade that he wanted. Let's put it that way. And so he came back to school. And of course, Howard Cross has come back to school as well. And I remember the days that they announced that they were going to be coming back, and the fan in me got a little giddy inside, because now Notre Dame has arguably 2 of the best defensive tackles in college football, or I should say the best combo of defensive tackles in the nation, coming back for another year of college football. And we would be having a much different conversation if these 2 guys had decided to go to the NFL. And so what we know is that if, Riley Mills and Howard Cross just repeat the season that they had last year, they're going to be really good. If they come back and do the things that they are wanting to do to boost their stock to the NFL, they're going to be super elite good.
I think that's especially true for Riley.
Yes.
Like with Howard, I don't know Howard Cross personally, but what I have heard about him, it would not shock me if Howard came back. Look, first of all, when you're barely 6 feet tall and you're 280 pounds and you're a defensive tackle and at this level and you're an All-American, you are a gritty, hardworking kid that wants to get after it, right? So there's no complacency there. What I'm saying is this. But if you are that kind of kid, I can also understand if it's Howard Cross is like, look, I just am not done playing college football and I have things I want to accomplish in Notre Dame, even if it's not like, hey, I got to improve on this part of my game. Right? Like Riley definitely, like I was told Howard was always leaning towards coming back because his breakout was kind of unexpected. From some things that Ryan and I heard during the season, there's a time where Riley was pretty much gone. He was going to leave and didn't quite get the feedback that I think that he was going to get. And so he came back. So he, even more so than Howard has, I need to prove myself here. But even with Howard, I do think there's another level that Howard can get to. I mean, look, he had an All-American year, 7 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Half of that production came against Duke. You know what I mean? He didn't have a sack, I don't think, until that game. I think he only had like 1 tackle for loss going. Vince, I don't know if I just went out just now. Like
you paused, and I wasn't sure if it was me or you. So I didn't.
It's me.
Okay.
What happened?
You just like
where
froze.
was I?
You were talking about Riley Mills and you just kind of like mid sentence froze.
Yeah, no, because I lost both of you, so I'm back now. So
yes, no, you're good now.
The point is, I think Riley has even more to prove, but I do think there's another level that Howard Cross can get to. And for both of them, it's back to what we talked about earlier. It's about finish. But at the end of the day, Vince, this defensive line is not going to make the jump because Riley and Howard get better.
Right.
They are already both very good.
Correct.
Now, is there a level for them to get better? Yes. But I don't think that's like, if I'm putting my priority list of things the D-line needs to do, this is not my priority number one.
Sure.
Like, if they just repeat. Now, here's the key, though. Not everybody just keeps progressing. Some guys regress.
Sure, yeah,
They
absolutely.
need to make sure that Howard Cross and Riley Mills don't regress. So now that's going to be a key. But as long as if they just do that, then they're going to be fine. If they get better, that's even better. But to me, it hinges on a lot more on other things that we'll get into. But it's nice. It's the foundation of knowing those two were here and those two were hungry, and the things that I had in my intel piece about the attitude they've had. They both come back with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. I'm like, how does Howard Cross still have a chip on his shoulder? He's a second-team All-American last year. But I love it. But it's like, that's why a 6'1", 285-pound defensive tackle
does what he does.
Can do what he does, because he kind of always plays with a chip on his shoulder. You 100%. Know what I mean? And so that's what you look at, is like you have that foundation, and you're starting the season off with arguably the best 1-2 punch at tackle in the country. I think right now the only team that contends with them in regard to proven players. Now, there's some teams that are going to have ascending really good D-tackle combos, but as far as what we know, is the Michigan duo of Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham. That's the only one to me that can contend with Riley Mills. You've got two guys. They are the only two defensive tackles in all of college football that coming back that ranked in the top 20 last year in pass rushing success and run success. The only two. The only team with two of those guys. Michigan had two guys in there too, but it was a different guy. It was three, because remember, Michigan had a great 3-man rotation last year. So they had two guys in the top 25 in one, two in the top 25 in another. Mason Graham, I think, was top 25 in both, but Kenneth Grant was top 25 in one, and Chris Jenkins was top 25 in another. For Notre Dame, it was those two. And if you look at Gabriel Rubio's grade, he was in there as well. It's the third. He's out now, right, which we'll get into. But those two guys were both in there. So you are starting the year off with an outstanding combination. Vince, you and I talk about this all the time. To be a great defense, you have to be great right up the middle on all three levels.
Sure.
And first line of attack, you feel pretty good about being very good when your starters are on the field.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, up the middle. It's baseball, football. You want to be good up the middle. And I like where Notre Dame is, especially on the defensive line, up the middle. Now, other things that we know that this defensive line is going to be deep. There's a chance they could play 10, maybe 11 guys, depending on how things shake out in the fall and depending on how some guys develop and, all of those things. I don't know when the last time we said that Notre Dame could go 10 or 11 deep on the defensive line and be legit.
I would argue, Vince, prior to Rubio's, I'm sorry, I didn't even interrupt you. I'm trying to get better about not interrupting.
No, you're good.
I would argue that they could go 3 deep prior to Rubio's injury.
So it would be 12.
Because your third team would be Junior Chalamock at Viper, Bryce Young at defensive end, Donovan Heinisch at nose, and then who's your Armo Muka, maybe somebody like that, or excuse me, Donovan Heinisch is your number 3 technique. And then either Armo Mukum or Sean Sevalon or something like that at nose. Like, I think you were a legitimate 3 deep of guys that can help you right now.
Sure.
Right? And, those
now,
are the things.
Would you trust all 12 of those guys
to play?
In the Texas A&M game, for example.
To play. Yes,
okay.
to play.
Okay.
Now, the question is, and we'll get into this next, that you do have to ask yourself, okay, are you trusting them to play or to make plays? That's a different conversation.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
Very different conversation, because a lot of those guys I don't trust to make plays. I just say, hey, look, you can spell this guy. You can spell this guy. You can play short yardage. You can play goal line. You have 12 guys that can help you in some capacity right now.
Okay.
There's no doubt. And it's an athletic group.
Oh,
it's a very athletic group of players. I mean, your third team is a 5-star freshman defensive end, a former top 150 recruit at Viper. For those people that care about such things, Donovan Heinisch is a very athletic player. Jason Rubio is a very athletic player. Josh Burnham, RJ Oben are both good athletes. Boubacar Traore is a very athletic player. You've got a very athletic group of players. That's the other thing. It's not a real big D line. It's not a very big defensive line. They don't try to play like a big defensive line.
I was going to say, that's not exactly who
Al
Golden
they are.
is looking for. Like, that's not really somebody that
they
fits.
want disruptors.
Yeah, exactly.
And you need athletic guys to be disruptors, and they have that.
Right.
We'll talk about the next level for that group here when we get into the next section of the show. But you do know you have bodies.
Correct.
You have good bodies, talented, long, athletic, talented bodies. And that's kind of the third part, right, Vince, is it's talented.
There's talent, and it's some of it's unproven, right? But there is talent there. And if you want to go off of recruiting rankings, if you want to go off of what we just see with our naked eye, I had mentioned when I was at practice the other day with you, and I had to walk past the defensive line, and they were doing their tackling circuit, and they were, sprinting over some dummies with high knees and, kind of going through a little bit of a gauntlet type of deal. And it's just like, they didn't look like defensive linemen. You know what I mean? They just looked like massive athletic guys going through this drill. I mean, a lot of people think of defensive line. You just think of like these 350-pound guys that are just space eaters and stuff like that. Now, is there a place for guys like that? Sure. But this particular group is just athletic. There's a bunch of long guys in there. There's a bunch of fast twitch guys in there. They're just an athletic group overall, and it stands out when you see them in person. And so that, it's hard for a lot of things to stand out when guys are just running around in helmets, but that is definitely one thing that stands out is they are athletic, they're long, and they're quick. And those are the kind of guys that will excel inside of Al Golden's defense. That's what he wants. He wants guys that are fast twitch. They're going to get off the ball. They're going to be able to twist and, slant and do some different things and just, really mess with an offensive line, get in the backfield, and then cause some disruption. I mean, that's what he wants. And I have to say that this defensive line kind of checks a lot of those boxes. Now, we're going to talk in a second about, some questions, what we don't know and things like that. There's some unproven talent in there. We haven't seen them do it on a Saturday, right? We've seen them do it in high school, but we haven't seen them do it, in a Notre Dame uniform on a consistent basis. But man, is there a lot of talent there. There's no doubt about that. So there we go. Let's transition over to the next part of this particular conversation. It's our biggest question marks or what we don't know. And let's move a little bit to the outside and kind of the hanging question that we seem to have a lot going into the season. And this season is no different. Will Viper be any better? Will Viper be that position that Notre Dame needs it to be?
That might be the biggest question mark on this team, on this defense for me. I mean, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, here's the thing. They don't need Viper to be any better than it was last year to be a top 10 D-line because they had a top 10 D-line last year and the Viper position gave you very little.
Very little. So little.
So it's like people talk about like, oh, the Viper's my only concern. It's my concern too.
Yeah.
But what is the concern in regard to that they're going to be a good D-line? No, because they were in excellent D-line last year and the Viper position wasn't very good. But the Viper position not giving you much is what hurts you in those games because, like, right now you're basically saying, Howard and Riley, we need you to ball every game. Defensive ends, we need you to ball every game because Viper ain't helping out, right? Like, we're not getting anything from them. We need you. So when they don't play there, you are in trouble.
Yeah.
That's when you have your down game. So you need the Viper position to be able to be a consistent producer.
Right.
Not elite production, but just more than what you did last
Hold
year.
their own. I mean,
then have a few games where they play well. Like last year, there was like no games where the Viper position was a strength. None. I can't think of one anyway where you go like, oh, Viper was good this game. I can't think of one. You need at least 3 or 4 games. You're like, hey, Viper's pretty good this game.
Yeah.
That's going to be a big key, Vince, because if they don't play better, it hurts your ability to really make that jump as a group.
Sure.
And then, we'll get into some specific players later, but that position has to give you much better production than it had last year. I mean, I'm looking at the numbers now, Vince, and you look at you just look at the total production. Like Junior Tuilamaka was your 2A and 2B last year at backup Viper. You had Burnham was part of it. Burnham did well, I thought. Burnham had 4 tackles for loss. And had a sack as a backup defensive.
It didn't seem like he was on the field very often, but
not a ton. But Josh Burnham had 4 tackles for loss last year. Your starter only had 4.5, and 4 of those tackles for loss came on sacks.
Yeah,
You know, I mean, so you didn't get a whole lot out of Jordan Botelho. And then 1.5 of his tackles for loss and one of his sacks came in a bowl game against Oregon State's backup offensive tackles. So, like, during the regular season, your starting Viper gave you 3 tackles for loss. That's it.
Yeah.
You know, now, and Josh Burnham had 4 tackles last year. 1.5 of his last season was in the bowl game, right? So now you're talking about 3 from your starter, 2 from your primary backup, and 0 from your other backup. You got 6.5. Wait a minute. Hold on. Am I doing the math correctly? You got 3. You had 5.5 tackles for loss last year from your Viper position in the regular season. 5.5. That's it. Like that's really bad.
Yeah.
Like, Vince, that's really bad.
It's not good.
And Nana Osafo-Mensah, the backup defensive end, had 5.5 by himself. You know, and so you're talking about your entire position group gave you 5.5 tackles for loss. Oh, and by the way, Nana gave you 5.5 last year by himself, didn't play in the bowl game. Like, and you still had a top 10 D line.
Right.
Right. So any improved production from this group is a bonus.
Mm-hmm.
But again, what's the standard? The standard is, can you play for a championship? And if this unit is gonna go into the postseason, and if this team is gonna, part of it is they may get some lucky breaks as far as who they play. But if they have to play Ohio State again, what hurt Notre Dame in the fourth quarter of that game? They couldn't get consistent pressure on Kyle McCord without blitzing. So on 4th and 7, they had to bring pressure because you could otherwise he's going to sit back there all day and pick you apart. You couldn't get pressure with your front 4. You had to bring a blitz. What does that mean? It means they're going to get in a good matchup and they're going to convert a 4th and 7, which is exactly what they did. Right. You're going to need this position more than any other. This is the biggest question mark, in my opinion, of the entire defensive side of the ball.
Sure.
Are they going to repeat what they did last year, or are they going to be better? Because it's basically kind of the same group. You lose Burnham and you add Boubacar. It's the same exact group. I mean, Junior Talamaka, Jordan Botelho, Boubacar Traore. That's going to be the rotation. Can they give you more than what they got last year? I should add the position group gave you 6.5 tackles for loss because I forgot about Boubacar's sack against USC. So I was way off. It's not good.
How dare you?
It's not good. And so that's the thing for me, is that group more than any other has to get a lot. I mean, you've got to double your production. I mean, is that fair to say, Vince?
Yeah. And I don't think that should be that hard.
Tackles for loss. That's it.
That's
not even what Isaiah Foskey did by himself in the previous 2 years, Vince.
This is what I'm saying.
So you got to double your production, and it's got to be somewhat meaningful production. It can't be you have 5 tackles for loss against Navy against triple option, and you had 3 tackles for Illinois,
Miami of Ohio.
Exactly.
Right.
You got to be competent at those other positions.
Right.
Look, I'm confident defensive end is going to be really good. I'm confident the defensive tackles and the nose tackles are going to be really good. Viper's the one I have no clue how good they're going to be.
Look, I have dabbled in betting, never really over $5 a bet, right? I don't know that I would place a bet that the Viper position is going to be that much better than it was last year. I am so much in the you've got to show me something, Jordan Botelho. You've got to show me something, Viper position, in order for me to be a believer at this point. I'm just being honest about where I'm at with this group. I feel like I've seen this show before. I've gotten excited before, and I've been let down before. Now, I still think this defense is going to be really good, and you did a great job of illustrating why this defense can still be really, really good without the production of the Viper, but think how good they can be with some production from the Viper. Like, that's the biggest thing for me. You have been in this defense for 3 years now. You're super athletic. You're long. You're all of these different things.
Well, one of the guys at the position is super athletic. The other 2 are just good athletes for the position,
fair.
Not elite. I just want to make sure that I don't think Jordan Botelho and Jordan Botelho are super athletic. I think Boubacar is.
Yeah, right.
But
and you know what? If Boubacar is who we think he could be, let's go, buddy. Like, now's the time. You've got an opportunity here to climb the depth chart, in my opinion. Now, I don't know. And again, you've said this before, and I'll kind of reiterate it real quick. Whoever starts the game, that's one thing. Who's in the game when it matters? Who's in the game when you need to stop a drive. You need a team to go 3 and out. You need to create a turnover. You need to do this. You need to do that. Who's in the game then? I think that's going to tell us something. In my opinion, this position's wide open. And I know that Jordan Botelho is the starter, and I get all of that. He's been around. To me, this position should be wide open.
I think what I agree and disagree. I disagree in that we know who the DNs are going to be. The Vipers are going to be. We know who they're going to be. Where I think it's wide open, to your point, Vince, and correct me if this is not what you're saying, is we know who they're going to be, but we don't know what the snap distribution is going to be.
That's exactly what I was saying. Yes.
And that's going to be something that's up for debate. And I'll just say, I hope Jordan Botelho is the starter because he's your veteran. He's your experienced guy.
He should be.
He's the guy that's had some of those flashes, but they're going to need Junior to be better, and they're going to need Boubacar to step up.
Yeah.
And Botelho's got to get a lot better. There's no excuse for Botelho. Now, good thing is, if you are on the board, you would have read this well over a week ago, almost 2 weeks ago now. That's been the feedback so far this summer, is this is the most locked in that Jordan Botelho's ever been.
Great.
He realizes this is his last chance. But I'm going to say about Jordan Botelho what I've said all summer and what I said about Marist all summer the year before. That sounds great. I need to see it. I need to see it.
Exactly.
Right, before I'm going to buy in. But if he does step up, that's huge. They need him to be better. They need him to be the best version of himself. And we've seen it. This isn't like we're trying to rely on what he did in high school. This is a guy that had 10 quarterback pressures in the bowl game against South Carolina, Vince.
Right.
In one game. Ryan and I sat there almost field level, the way that Syracuse stadium is, and watched Jordan Botelho just look great against Syracuse. Like, we've seen him do it. It's not about, well, he was really highly ranked, and based on that, we're just waiting on the breakout to come. Right? No, it's we've seen him do it. I just want him to be able to do that in back-to-back games.
Right.
That's all I'm asking. I mean, heck, he only had 18 pressures last year. 3 of them came against Ohio State. He only, he had a hit on the quarterback. And I mean, it's so you just need to see that more consistently. That's gonna be the key. Is he needs to be more consistent. And yeah, I mean, it's the biggest key. It's the biggest key to this. That position getting better is the biggest key to this defensive line. And we're about to talk about number 2.
Well, and I'll just say this, and it'll kind of transition us to the other side of the defensive line. I said this before on the night show, and I'll say it here, and it's a little out there, and I'm fine with that. I would not be upset if they moved Josh Burnham over to that side and he just balls out to Viper. Yeah,
not going to happen.
I get it.
I asked about.
Did
that.
you ask about that?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, part of it is because of how, and we'll get into Burnham and Boubacar here in a little bit because we're going to talk about both of them in the breakout section. But that's the reason why.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that it's not good. It may not happen eventually, but I'll just say this: if they move Burnham to Viper, it's because things went poorly.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And I think to me, and again, this is Vince talking. This is not intel. This is not if things aren't going the way they want them to go at Viper. I feel like Josh, and we'll talk about him in the breakouts. So, spoiler alert, you just said it, but I feel like he's going to have such a year that if they're having issues on Viper, they'll be like, you know what? We need to get this kid on the field more often. Anyway, let's move him over and let him ball out. You know what I mean? And that's how it's kind of like a combination. It's like, okay, they're not doing as well as they should. Josh is doing super well. Let's get him on the field more often. Like, that's how I see that in my own sick brain. But
the other thing is, and let's kind of talk about this as question number 2. The question now is, can the big ends, the defensive ends, because the way, just so people understand, when we say defensive end, that's one position in the Notre Dame defense.
Right.
That's the field end, the big end. They call it defensive end. The Viper is the Viper. It's the weak side end is the Viper. So when we say defensive end, we're talking about that. And then there's 3 technique and nose tackles, just so people understand. And so when you look at that position, it was a strength for Notre Dame last year. It was the biggest question mark going into the season, and it became a strength. Javonte Jean-Baptiste was a great pickup last year, and Nana was one of the more underappreciated players on the line. He gave you 5.5 tackles for loss and 3 sacks off the bench last year. You want to know why you're able to be a top 10 defensive line with your Viper giving you almost nothing production-wise? Because you had one of the best D-tackle combos in college football. And at big end, you had Baptiste and Nana gave you 16 tackles for loss and 8.5 sacks. 8 sacks. That's what it was. Now the question is, can they get that kind of production again this year? That's the big question.
Right. With a whole new cast of characters over there. I mean, you lost a guy who was an absolute revelation at defensive end last year in Javonte Jean-Baptiste and what he was able to do. And Nana obviously backed him up very, very well. And they were just super strong over there. So now you go and you bring in RJ Oben from Duke. And, I understand that he had not issues. That's not right. But this is a different defense. And so he's asked to do some different things and to, he's not just a rush end, like he was at Duke. He's going to have to do some different stuff. And so that transition has been a transition. I mean, I'm not saying he's not going to be able to do it, but there was a bit of a transition when he first got over here. And so now he's really kind of settling in, which is great to see. And then you've got Josh Burnham, who, as I said earlier, it didn't feel like he played a whole lot last year. He's going to get a lot of opportunity this year to play.
Yeah.
And, big shoes to fill for both of these guys.
Yeah.
And so you've got kind of the same cast of characters on one side at Viper, and you've got a new cast of characters on the other side at defensive end who have big shoes to fill and need to, essentially be a strength of this defensive line. Can they do it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big question. I feel confident that it can happen, but we won't know until the season starts and we see what they do game in and game out.
Well, the good news is RJ Oben is an experienced player. I mean, this is a guy that brings over 20 career tackles for loss. I think he's got about 14 or so career sacks.
He was a leader on that defense. I mean,
they
went as he went.
I mean, he's had an adjustment period.
Yeah.
He went from being sort of like a wide edge rusher that just kind of came after the quarterback to now they're asking to be an all-around player. That's kind of Javonte was a bit more of an all-around guy at Ohio State, but he was more of a backup edge rusher type of guy.
He didn't have the proven production and being a starter and all of that. So therein lied the question mark for us going into last year.
And he was great. And Al Washington did a great job getting him ready to go. Now it's up to Coach Washington to get the same thing with RJ Oben. But you at least know there's a baseline, a floor with RJ. RJ, at the very least, is going to be better than what Nana was. At the very least.
Agreed.
The question is, can he be as good as Javonte was? And then you've got Josh Burnham at the position. And say, okay, well, can he be better than Nana? Can he be better than Javonte? Can they as a duo be better? That's the question. But here's one thing this group has that last year's group didn't have. They've got a third guy to play in this position. And we'll talk more about him specifically coming up, and that's Bryce Young. And so the reason that I'm excited about the end position is that there is a level of proven production at the position in RJ Oben. There's a high level amount of talent behind him in Josh Burnham and Bryce Young. And the fact that you're not just counting on one guy to hopefully replace what you had last year is always the reason, Vince, why I feel good about this position being good, because they don't need all three of them to be good. They just need two of them to be good.
Yeah.
And I think at least two of them will be good. So I'm actually not worried about this position group. However, that's my emotional feeling, right? There's nothing practical about how I'm feeling other than emotionally and from an evaluation standpoint of what guys are talent-wise. But as I've said a million times, Vince, potential does not win you football games. Production does.
Darn right.
Right? And potential will get you beat. Because what I mean by that is if all we're doing is talking about what you can potentially be, it means you aren't that right now. And if you aren't that right now, then the production is not going to match the potential. You want a guy to be good, not could be good.
Right.
And that's going to be the question. So even though from my evaluation standpoint, emotionally, my feeling about the big end position, the defensive end position is good, we also have to be able to look at it and objectively say it's still a question mark because Burnham hasn't proven that he can do it. He had 4 tackles for loss and a sack last year. That's not proven production, right? Love the talent, love the potential. Sure. Now it's show me mode. RJ Oben was very good with what they asked him to do at Duke. Notre Dame's asked him to do a lot more than he did at Duke. They're asking him to be a much more diverse, versatile, all-around player than what he was at Duke. Those are all questions that we don't know if they can play to that level.
Sure.
The talent's there, though. That's the exciting thing, and that's what we know. Talented group. But does the talent turn into production? And does it turn into production? Like, I fully expect Josh Burnham and RJ Oben to eat up Northern Illinois and Miami and Ohio.
Oh,
and
sure.
like
they
that.
better.
Are they going to be able to go in there in College Station and handle business against the Texas A&M tackles? Are they going to be able to go up against Louisville's tackles and get after the quarterback in that game? Can they go against a very veteran group of offensive linemen? Darius Washington is on my first team all preseason, all opponent team. He was voted preseason all AC, first team all ACC by the media. Are they going to be able to go against him and have success? Those are very good questions, Vince. And that's why I have to look at and say, yeah, I love the talent and I think they're going to be good, but we need to see it. We need to see it. Now, if you want to, kind of get into a little bit of, okay, I feel good about it. RJ Oben did have 4 pressures and a hit on the quarterback last year against Florida State. So, I mean, we have film of him going against them. He led Duke, and if you remember, Duke had a lead late in the game against Florida State on the road until once Riley Leonard went out, that's when it kind of went downhill for them.
Sure.
But RJ Oben actually played pretty well against them, I felt, from a pass rushing standpoint last season. So, 4 pressures and 26 pass rush snaps is a pretty good performance. And it was his third highest of the year behind. He had 3 against Clemson. And that's the thing about RJ. It's like, yeah, he's got to show, but guy had 5 pressures last year against Clemson, three hits and a sack, according to Pro Football Focus. Had 3 pressures against NC State, who was an 8-9 win team last year, 5 pressures against Northwestern, who was a bowl team last year. So, I mean, 3 pressures on the road against Drake May in North Carolina. So he did play well in the biggest moments. That is one thing I really like about him. Now we just need to see if he can do that consistently, and we need to see if Josh Burnham can be the guy that we think he is. Sure. That's going to be the key. And I'm optimistic about it, but we also have to be honest and say it's still a question mark.
One of the things that you had mentioned or that we talked about kind of earlier and how deep this team could potentially go, and it's the depth. And we like to talk about the depth. We talk about them going 10, 11, 12 deep, actually playing in a game. But what kind of production is that depth going to produce? I think your exact quote was, yes, they'll play. Are they playmakers? I think that's a legit question. And how deep on that depth chart can you go and still find playmakers, right? I mean, we as fans, Notre Dame was an eyelash away from their 2 starting defensive tackles being in the NFL. And these depth pieces that we're all excited about being depth pieces would have been starters, And so what does that do to your depth? And how does that make your depth even stronger now that those guys have come back? And so I think the biggest question about the defensive line as far as depth is concerned is how far down are you going to go before you stop hitting playmakers and you start just hitting guys that are playing? And I think that's a definitive answer that, we're not going to get right away. Obviously, we can hear the coaches and hear what they have to say, and they're excited about these guys and, all these different things, but can those guys make plays when it matters? That's what counts.
Yeah. I mean, can Jason Onye take what he did in the spring into the fall?
Sure.
Where he was disruptive and one of their better defensive linemen. Can the guys behind, can Junior Tielmach and Boubacar Traore step up? Can Josh Burnham and RJ Oben, can that depth of that group give you plays? Can Bryce Young help you out? Can Donovan Heinisch be even better than he was a solid player last year in his first year in the rotation, showed some promise, a little light in the pants, which he's young. He kind of got thrust into the rotation early when Gabriel
welcome to being
down.
a Heinisch, being light in the pants a little bit.
But Kurt's bigger than him, but Donovan's more athletic. Donovan, I would argue Donovan has more talent than Kurt did. Kurt was Kurt was going to give you everything he had. I really feel like Kurt's whole goal in life was to make me look stupid. I really do. Because every time I'd say something negative about him, he'd go out the next week and have the best game of his career.
Yeah,
what? I love that about him.
Yes.
But Donovan's more physically gifted. He's just not as big as Kurt was at that same age. Because remember, Kurt played as a true freshman at Notre Dame. But he's a year older. He's a year stronger.
Yeah.
He's got another year in the weight room and those type of things. Because so he's now in that role where he's not helping you because he has to, because Gabriel got hurt. He's now going to help you this year because he's ready to help you. Can he make more plays than he did last year? That's a legitimate question. When Gabriel Rubio comes back, Gabriel was a really good run stuffer, but he didn't make a ton of plays. Can he make more plays this year? That's going to be the question, Vince, because you've seen some Notre Dame teams that have some really good I almost said great. The 2012 team had a great starting defensive line. The 2015 team had a really good starting defensive line. The problem in both situations was when they went to their next group, there was a big drop-off. Love Tony Springman, great effort guy. Big drop-off between Lewis Nixon and Tony Springman. Big drop-off between Capron Lewis Moore and Kona Schwenke, the late Kona Schwenke. Big drop-off between Stephon Tuitt and a true freshman version of Sheldon Day. Right? Just big drop-off. Just like in 2015, there was a big drop-off between Sheldon Day, who had one of the best D-tackle seasons the Notre Dame guys had in 20 years, with 15 and a half tackles for loss in 2015, to whoever they brought in to off the bench. You know what I mean? And same thing at nose tackle, because you were already down Jerron Jones, and then got Jerry Tillery, and there was a drop-off when Jerry Tillery came off the field, and they put Daniel Cage on the field. There was a big drop-off when Isaac Rochelle or Romeo Okwara weren't on the field. There just was a bigger drop-off. The great defenses, and Ryan and I have talked about this in the past with like that 2021 and 22 Georgia team, they would have a guy come off the field and put a future first-round draft pick. I mean, in 2021, Jalen Carter didn't even start for Georgia all the time.
It's crazy. The depth that they had was unreal.
Right.
It was unreal.
Right. So you got to find out if Notre Dame can have guys, when those guys come on the field, can they give you play? Can they not just give you snaps, but can they make plays for you? Because remember in 2022, Al Golden would do like mass substitutions on the D-line. And it's like almost every time he'd almost do like a mass substitution to the number twos, and the other team would go like right down the field and score. And you're like, dude, you got to stop doing that. Now you say, oh, you know what? We may see that a little bit this year, and you feel good about it because of Onye and Heinisch. And then when Rubio comes back and you've got Burnham or Oben and Boubacar out there, like, you know what? They're going to be all right. They're going to be all right. That's going to be a key. Can they provide that for you? And the potential's there, Vince. But again, the concern, the reason these things are being talked about in the question mark area is because right now it's still all about potential.
Yeah.
And it hasn't turned into proven production.
And it's confident potential on our part. I mean, we're confident that these guys are going to be able to do certain things and rack up certain stats and, all of the like, but it still hasn't happened yet. And that's why it's still a question mark. I mean, I would like to think that we're always right, but it would be nice to see it on the field as well. And so that's why it's still a question mark for us and why we have to put it under the question mark category, because it's something that we haven't seen on a consistent basis on a Saturday in a Notre Dame uniform. And that's the fun part about college football, is the turnover and all of those different things. And I think at the end of the day, if these question marks that we have get answered in a positive manner, even mostly answered in a positive manner, this defensive line is going to be really, really, really good. Before we move on to section number 3, or I guess 4 today, make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends, and make sure you jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com. Well, again, we are going to be hitting practice tomorrow, and there's going to be a practice report put up as soon as we get done, and the only place where you're going to be able to find that is on the boards. So make sure you sign up and you are ready to rock and roll. Our final piece of the puzzle today, Brian, and part 4 of our talk about the defensive line, is we want to talk about who we think are going to be the breakouts of this defensive line. And then we also want to talk about some of the newcomers as well. And newcomers mainly being the freshmen. We're not talking about, RJ Oben. We've talked about him a lot, obviously. But we want to talk about the breakouts and who we feel really good about having a really good season, and then guys that maybe have a chance of being a breakout and having a really good season. So I'll let you kick it off with who you have the most confidence that will be a breakout on this defensive line.
It's really 2 guys, right? And it's the B&B boys. I mean, that's what it comes down to for me. It's
like
Boubacar Traore and Josh Burnham, right? That's what it comes down to for me, Boubacar and Burnham. And look, because here's the deal, Vince. It's part of the reason that I had, like I said earlier, I feel this is going to be good. Like, my emotional evaluation is that that all these questions that we have are going to be answered positively.
Agreed.
Why? Because we're not talking about, man, I hope this really good try-hard kid can give you a lot, right? You love Justin Adamiola, great effort and all that, but there's there's a reason him and his brother didn't get drafted, especially Justin. Jason had some other issues, but like there's a reason Justin gets drafted. He's undersized. He's not a super athlete. He was just a great try-hard guy. You know, Myron Tungvalo-Mosa, Kurt Hinish, great try-hard guys.
Sure.
The difference now is you're actually talking about actual big-time talent.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not Boubacar Traore, 6'4" with 35+ inch arms, is from what I'm told. Right? Josh Burnham is a very, very twitchy athlete with very long arms at almost 6'4" and over 250 pounds. You know, these are guys that aren't just, man, I hope that, you know, former 3-star, you know, great effort, great attitude, try-hard guy can help you out this year. The Jameer Jones, and you love those guys. You need those guys.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't bank your entire season on those guys being dudes. That's the difference. You need them to not be dudes, right? And the dudes you want to be guys that you look at and say, that guy's got tools to eventually be something. And when I look at Boubacar and Josh Burnham, of the non-freshmen,
right,
they're the two most physically gifted defensive linemen Notre Dame has. Not defensive ends, defensive linemen that Notre Dame has coming back, right? Like this, just God-given of tools and potential.
Sure.
But the two of them combined for 2 sacks last year, right? So the production's got to take a big jump. So, I mean, this is an easy one. They're going to be breakouts to some degree. You know, Vince, we always have layers to breakouts.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
There's guys who are rotation guys that become like regulars and good producers, and then there's the guys that become stars and all that. I don't know if either of them are going to have breakouts to where they're going to jump from what they were last year into the star category, but I fully expect both of them to go from 1 sack each to minimum 4 sacks each this season. Like, I think they're going to become better parts of this defensive line rotation.
Yeah.
How far they go, that remains to be seen. But I'm quite confident saying those two alone are going to give this edge group a boost in pass rushing ability. Just day one boost in pass rushing ability this season.
Well, look, if you've been listening to the entire show, I already said that I want to move Josh over to the other side so he can be a starter. So I obviously have a lot of confidence in what Josh Burnham can do. And just seeing him live and in person just solidifies that fact for me. I mean, I love this kid. And I think, I don't want to say he got the shaft last year. I don't think he played enough. I'm not saying he should have started last year. I would have liked to see him on the field a little bit more. But there were some pretty good guys in front of him. And so it makes sense, right? Well, he's going to have an opportunity this year, I think, to really make some noise. And I think when we think about the levels of breakout, you know, he's going to go from like a seldom used rotation player to a guy that they count on. And I don't know that he'll ever be a quote unquote official starter, right? But I think he will be in when it matters. I think he will be on the field when it matters in some form or fashion. And that's all I need from him. I think he's going to be a guy that they trust. I think he's going to be a guy that they count on. And I think he's going to be a guy that allows this staff to not necessarily have to go to the transfer portal for another defensive end. I think they're going to be like, we got Josh. We're good. It's not necessary. And just like we talk about at the quarterback position, right? They've recruited to a point where they shouldn't have to go to the portal for a starting quarterback. They shouldn't have to go to the portal for a starting defensive end because of the guys that they have developed and the guys that they have recruited. And so that's where I see Josh being. I think this is going to be a big year for him. And I think it's just going to propel him into the starting role for next year. And then he takes that next step where we could have that conversation again about being a quote unquote breakout because he has a chance to go to that next level.
Burnham and Bryce Young going into 2025 should give you a lot of confidence to not have to worry about going to the portal. And then hopefully by then, like Brennan Vernon, hopefully moves outside and he's developed that number 3. And
then you've got
Chris Burgess coming in as a true freshman that can help you. Like, you know what? We may need to go there for Viper or some defensive tackle, maybe.
Sure.
But big end, you're like, nah, we're good. We got our guys that we've developed and and you're going to be in a good position. So yeah, you nailed that, Vince. Absolutely nailed that. Agree with you.
So there's kind of a next level of guys. Well, you didn't talk about another guy who's on the inside that you think has a really good chance.
Yeah, Jason Onye. Jason Onye is a guy that, look, we just, you know, we saw him show flashes the previous spring and in fall camp, and then we saw him show flashes last season, but he very much looked, very much looked like a guy that had never really played meaningful downs of college football. and was figuring it all out. Last year's production helped him a ton. Or not last year's production. Last year's snaps, last year's opportunities, last year's playing
attention.
time.
I mean,
right.
because because remember back 2 springs ago, so not this past spring, but the spring before that, he was kind of like the media darling, right? Because he kind of likes to chirp a little bit, and he's funny, and that we caught some,
and you'd see some flashes of talent.
100%.
I mean, like, wow, that guy's got a little something there.
And then I don't know that the I don't want this to sound negative, because it's not negative, but I don't know if the production matched
definitely
the media hype, right?
Definitely.
I mean that he was getting.
Well,
but I don't think
I don't know that anyone. I think he kind of lived up to the hype because he was a regular in the rotation. I don't know that anyone thought he was going to come out. At least I don't know of anyone that I spoke to. I don't read what anyone else wrote. You would have a better sense of that than I do. But no one that I spoke to. So like when I'm talking to Tim O'Malley and Tim Priester and guys like that, none of us were like, man, Jason Onye may push Riley Mills this year for a starting job. I mean, that wasn't the conversation. It was like, hey, I think this kid's going to help you out and give you some snaps this year. And he did. Yeah. And there were times when he did that and produced. I mean, first 4 games of the year, he had 5 pressures.
Yeah.
Then he went through a period of a month or so where he didn't do a whole lot. And then he finished the year off pretty well, I thought, So, I mean, he had 5 pressures and 8 run stops in the first 4 games of the season last year, Vince. That's very good production. And then he kind of faded. When the schedule ramped up, it faded. He didn't play against Ohio State, didn't play a lot against Duke, didn't play a lot against Louisville, didn't play a lot against USC, and then didn't play a lot against Clemson, and then played a little bit in the last few games. So it was sort of that break-in season for him. And I think he did exactly what you hoped he would do, minimum of what you hoped he would do. Not like that's the best you could have expected. No, he did the minimum of what you hoped he would do and slightly more. And then he gave you, over 100 snaps last season. And gave you 155 is what Pro Football Focus has him as. He came into the year with 8 career snaps. That's it. Well, now he goes into a season with 163 career snaps, not 8. And another strong spring and a more consistent spring.
Right.
That ended with him playing very well in the Jersey scrimmage and very well in the blue gold game. And so now it's like, okay, when you spell Riley Mills, can you produce? When you spell Howard Cross, because they do a little bit of swinging with Onye, can you produce? In my prediction this year is that he will, which is going to allow them to play Riley a little bit less, which is going to allow Riley to be even fresher in the fourth quarter. And my hope is that with that, Riley Mills can become sort of the 2024 version of what Khalid Kareem was in 2018. You remember what Khalid was an end, but I'm talking about this specifically. It just, to me, seems a lot like, and I talked about it back then, Vince, but it seemed like whenever they were in a game where they needed a stop in the fourth quarter, it was Khalid who made it. Mm-hmm. Whether it was Michigan, whether it was Vanderbilt, whether it was Pitt, it just seemed like whenever a big play needed to be made in the fourth quarter, Khalid would make it. Well, part of the reason for that is because Khalid didn't have to play 60 snaps a game.
Sure.
Because they had Adetokunbo Ogundeji spelling him off the bench. And so Khalid could kind of go into games and say, hey, look, he's fresher in the fourth quarter of games because they could spell him at times. And Khalid was excellent that season. And so, and again, of course, as an edge player, there's not as much pounding on him. So you can get a little bit more snaps from a guy like that. But can Riley be that guy? I think he can be. Part of it is going to be just if you can take 10 snaps a game off of his shoulders in a lot of the games, and I think he can do that. But can you do that and still not lose his production? Because that's the problem. It's easy to make the decision, okay, we're going to play Howard and Riley 10 to 15 snaps, fewer snaps a game, especially in the games that aren't against the best opponents. Okay, great. You can make that decision, but it doesn't mean it's a good decision if the guys going into the game aren't producing. And so it comes down to, can Jason Onye justify Riley playing less with his play? Right. And I'm predicting that he will this season. I think he's off the bench going to be a 4 or 5 tackle for loss, couple sack kind of guy. That's what I think he's going to be.
And he's right on
minimum.
schedule. He's right
Minimum.
on schedule with where his development should be. He's not ahead of the game. He's not behind the game. Like, he's right on schedule, in my opinion. And I agree with you. The better off he is, the better off this defense is going to be, because, again, we're all sitting here hoping that Notre Dame's playing a 16-game schedule, right? And so I want a fresh Riley Mills in that 16th game, right? I want a fresh Howard Cross in that 16th game. I want to fresh all of those guys in the 16th game, but that takes every one of those guys to be able to pick up the slack and allow some guys to get a little bit extra rest at certain points in the season. I mean, every coach is learning this on the fly because they've never done it before. They're playing an NFL schedule, for goodness sakes. You know what I mean? And so the more productive and the more trust, that's a big word, the T word, right, for coaches, the more trust that Jason Onye has with Al Washington and Al Golden, I mean, the better off this defensive line is going to be. I mean, because then you've got a fresh Jason Onye, you've got a fresh Riley Mills, all of those things when it counts in December and January. So, yeah, that's it. That's going to be a huge piece of the puzzle, and I'm also very confident that that is going to take place. There's a couple more guys now, Brian, that have an opportunity to be a breakout this year, and it's an interesting list for sure. And we got a guy on here who is his first year with Notre Dame, and then we've got a couple of guys on here that are going to see an increased role this year as well.
Who would that be? Oh, I got you. The second part of the breakout category. I thought you were transitioning to freshman. I was like,
oh, no. I was
like, wait a second.
Trying to hit all the parts.
I'm like, increast role.
The look on your face was
talking about
fantastic.
No. It's yes. Yes. There's the two sections of the breakout. One is the guys I feel really good about, and the second one is guys that have a chance to have breakouts. The first one's RJ Oben. And in his case, a breakout is not repeating what he's done. If he kind of does around what Javonte did last year, that's a mini breakout for him. And I think he's got a chance to do that. 10 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. That's a mini breakout for him.
But yeah, I got you.
The question is, can he be even more productive than that on a per snap basis? Now, here's the interesting thing, and I've said this before. I could see a scenario where RJ Oben doesn't repeat or simply just matches what Javonte did last year, but he's much more productive. And what I mean by that is on a per snap basis. Because I don't think RJ is going to play as many snaps as what Javonte played last year.
Okay.
Because of Burnham.
I was going to say, because of what's behind him. Okay,
correct.
Gotcha. Yep.
So it'll be about evaluating him in a similar fashion that we evaluated Jack Kaiser. If you just look at Jack Kaiser's raw numbers, comparing to JD and Maris, it's like he wasn't close to being as productive. Yeah, he played half the snaps they played.
Right.
If you look at his production on a per snap basis, he was their most disruptive linebacker whenever he was on the field. And that's what I think RJ has a chance to be this year. And then here's the other thing too, is can RJ have the kind of year that keeps Josh Burnham as a number 2 as opposed to 1A, 1B? That's the other question. He has that potential. We just need to see if he can turn it into consistent production. We had Ryan on the show when he would talk about RJ. He says, this guy graded out as an NFL draft pick this year. He was on teams' draft boards if he would have come out this year. Now he's got a chance to kind of take things to another level, and he's got to do it. We talked about Heinisch as well, Vince. He's another guy on this list for me that I think, especially now that Gabriel Rubio is out, Donovan's got a chance to kind of come in and because here's the thing, Donovan Heinisch and Howard Cross are very, very, very similar players. Undersized, shorter, play with good pad level, disruptive, athletic guys that play beyond their size. Donovan's further along than Howard was, in my opinion, at the same age. Like if you look at where Donovan was, because Donovan was a second-year player last year. And you look at kind of what he was asked to do, I would argue that he was more productive and a better player than Howard Cross was in his second year with Notre Dame. So I think he gave you some really good production last year, some really good snaps last year. Now the question is, can he produce at an even higher level? Yeah. And I'll give you an example of what I'm referring to. Okay. So Howard Cross in his second year at Notre Dame, Howard Cross was a member of the 2019 class. Howard actually played a little bit as a true freshman. He played 63 snaps. In year 2, he played 166 snaps. Donovan in year 2 only played 100 snaps. But in year 2, in year 1 or year 2 for Howard, he had 6 run stops. Donovan last year in 66 fewer snaps had 9 run stops last season. So Howard in his 1 year in 166 snaps had 8 tackles. And Donovan Heinisch last year in 100 snaps had 9 tackles. So again, I'm talking about it on a per snap basis. Now, Howard was more disruptive from a pass rushing standpoint, but he also played twice as many pass rush snaps. So at the very minimum, Donovan is on the same level of trajectory that Howard was. I would argue he's slightly ahead of where Howard was at the same age. So can he go out there in the second year, in his third year, and kind of take a bit of a jump? That's going to be the question. And Howard really didn't take his big jump until years 4 and 5. Donovan might be a little bit ahead of schedule, and they're going to need him to be because the opportunity is there.
Yeah.
So I think that's why partly why I'm predicting the breakout for Donovan is because I think being in year 3, getting all those snaps last year, again, partly because Gabriel was out, prepared him to be better, to give you more this year. And I think he's going to come in and be that guy that you're like, man, you can afford to give Howard Cross 5 to 10 less snaps a game against Texas A&M because you've given those to Donovan and he's out there making plays.
Yeah.
Because that's where, when you're a coach, Vince, and you've got that stud and you put the backup in and the backup's having a great series, you're less prone to run your stud back out there like, hey, just hang over here. Let's let that young pup, eat a little bit because he's out there making plays. That's great because now I just took 4 or 5 snaps off what my guy was because I was going to rush him back out there. My other guy gave me some good snaps. We're just going to keep my starter fresher. You love being in that situation.
And again,
and I think
freshness is important based on everything that I said before about Jason Onier and et cetera, right? So yeah, he's going to be huge, and it'll be nice. It'll be fun to see number 41 out there causing havoc again, as it did with his older brother, and that whole thing. And we know that the effort and all of the things that the Heinisches are known for, which is why one of the reasons that Donovan got recruited to Notre Dame, is all going to be there. But I remember doing the commitment show with you for Donovan, and we were watching this film, and we were going through it, and all these different things, and it's like, okay, it's Kurt, but a more athletic version. And again, that has held true kind of throughout his Notre Dame career at this point. And so it'll be fun to see him out there making some plays for sure.
I want to do something real quick, Vince.
Yeah.
Donovan, Kurt Heinisch, in his second year at Notre Dame, played 366 snaps. In those, or 354 snaps. In those 354 snaps, he had 8 pressures and 9 tackles and 9 run stops in 354 snaps. Last year, Donovan Heinisch, in only 100 snaps, had only 2 pressures, but he had 9 tackles and 9 run stops.
Wow.
He had the same exact number of tackles and the same exact number of run stops that Kurt had in his sophomore year at Notre Dame.
With 3 times.
Over three times more
the
snaps.
amount.
So Kurt played 354 snaps. Donovan played 100. Now, for the little asterisk, this defensive system is geared more towards production from the D-line than that one was.
Sure.
But not that much.
Right.
Right? So it puts into context a little bit of what Donovan Heinisch is doing and what he's bringing to the table as a disruptive potential player. Now I expect him to take it to another level. I do.
Yeah. No,
I think
for sure.
His brother is an undrafted free agent who's playing snaps in the NFL now.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, you know what I mean? Like
100%.
That's just kind of that's who he is.
And you got one more guy that you want to talk about before we move on to
by the way,
Rooks.
Kurt Heinisch, who was undrafted, I'm looking at Pro Football Focus, played over 500 snaps in the NFL last year.
Yeah.
Right. So,
he sacked Ian Book, which that's what I remember.
That was 2 years ago, wasn't it?
I think so, but yeah.
Hater.
Well, I don't watch a lot of Texans games. I assume he's still with the Texans, I think. Okay. Yeah. So I have to say, I will admit that I don't watch a lot of Texans games.
He's played about 1,000 snaps the last 2 years. Vince.
That's impressive.
I mean, he played 39 snaps in the wild card game and 38 snaps in the divisional playoff game last year for the Texans.
He's in the rotation. No, I mean, that's clear.
He had 5 pressures, including 2 sacks in the postseason last year.
That's awesome.
Against Cleveland and Baltimore.
That's awesome.
So
that's so awesome.
Yep. Last guy for me is Armel Mukam. This is one that I'm a little less optimistic about right now.
Okay.
Gabriel Rubio being out has thrust Armel Mukum into the mix a little bit. And some of the things I heard from my sources around Notre Dame were his potential is immense, but they're just not sure if he's ready yet now. But sometimes when you give these really talented younger players opportunities, you get surprised by what they do.
Sure.
And I think Armel Mukum's a guy that I have my eye on as I want to see how he does with these extra reps in fall camp.
Sure.
Really want to see how he does. Because his first step's impressive, but you could also see in practice he's got a lot to learn. A lot to learn, but there's a lot of talent there. So he's a guy to at least keep an eye on.
This is a heck of a freshman class on this defensive line. And in a lot of other years, we would have already been talking about this class and what they were going to be doing probably on a Saturday, as far as higher up on the depth chart than they probably currently are, or maybe will be once the season gets rolling. And this is a very interesting rookie class. And so, we're going to talk about, 4 different guys, in the freshman class, one of which we think is going to be making an impact in the rotation, and then 3 other guys that could, make an impact as far as maybe make an impact on the depth chart or push some guys or, those kinds of situations. But there's definitely one guy that we think is going to be making an impact on this defensive line in games.
I mean, from 2019, so post 2018, but from 2019 to 2023, there is no question Bryce Young is your number 2 defensive end. And in some years, he might have started by middle of September, if not by the opener.
Right.
And he's that talented. He's 6'7", almost 260. And just athletically, you're just like, guys that big aren't supposed to move like that. I mean, he just has that ability.
Yep.
He's going to play this year. You just can't not play him this year. It's just like, it's kind of like I said about Joe Rudolph. It's like, hey, Coach Washington, like, dude, coach him up, get him ready. But the thing is, you don't have to play him 30 snaps a game.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to find a way to get him on the field for 10 snaps a game, especially against some of the lesser than opponents. Let's be honest. He needs to play minimum 15, 20 snaps against Northern Illinois and Miami of Ohio and Virginia and Navy, teams like that. But this is a kid that to me is going to play for you. What's his role? That's to be determined. But there's just way too much talent. We saw it in the spring game. We see it in practice where he'll have one snap and a one-on-one, and you're like, yeah, he's got to learn how to use those moves. And then the next time it's like, oh, there it was. You know what I mean? And he's very just one of those guys. Kid. And he's got to, that's it. You got to coach him up though. He's going to play. He's going to provide an impact this year. How much? I don't know. But you're going to look at his per snap production this year and be like, that kid's going to be a star next year. Like I have a feeling as good as I think this end rotation is right now, I have a feeling by the way that I expect Bryce Young and Josh Burnham to finish this season, that we're going to be looking ahead to next year saying, this is going to be fun.
Yeah.
This is going to be a lot of fun.
That's going to be one heck of a 1-2 punch on that side of the defense. Yeah. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. And that's, one of the many reasons that not looking past 24, but as you project to 25, which we can do because we're analysts and we're not coaches. And so we can look past this.
It's our show. We can do everything we want to.
Well, fair enough. But
I give you permission to project away, Vince.
Thanks, buddy. But when you look at 25 and it's one of the many reasons when you look at 25, you get very excited about what this team can do. I mean, bottom line. So,
and I think Andrew Gilmore just nailed a point that I wasn't even thinking about because I was just focusing on defense. He says, but Bryce Young should carry on the tradition of blocking punts like Isaiah Foskey and Jordan Patel.
Cool.
Young linemen that remember Patel
he's going to be a fixture on special teams.
Yeah. Isaiah had one against, was it Pitt in 2020? Right. And then Patel had one against South Florida in 2020 that year. Actually, Foskey's first block punt was actually against Stanford in 2019 on the road. Remember that? And he almost recovered it for a touchdown. So that was his redshirt freshman year for him that year.
He's 6'7" with long arms. Put him on the punt block team.
Yeah.
I mean,
figure it out. I mean, there's just so many, and this is what excites me about this team, Vince, and we'll wrap up quickly with the rest of the freshmen here. But the reality is, man, there's just certain guys in this freshman class, in this sophomore class, that you just got to say to your coaches, figure it out, man. Yeah, like, figure out a way to get them on the field.
100%.
I was having a conversation one time with a guy that coached under Urban Meyer, and Coach Meyer would go into their office and be like, this kid needs to play. Well, what do you expect? He's like, figure it out. Like, Get that kid on the field. That's your
That's
this
your
kid's
job.
too talented to not be playing.
Right.
Figure it out. Get him on the field. And there's just a lot of guys like that on the offensive side and defensive side of the ball. I mean, you look offensively, it's Gerby Lambert now. It's Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, Keedron Young. You know, you look at Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, KK Smith, Micah Gilbert, Cam Williams. You know, defensively, you look at other positions. I mean, dude, figure it out. Get Christian Grant on the field some way, somehow. Figure it out. You know, Leonard Moore.
Yeah.
You know, you look at Drake Bowen, Kingston Viliama-Asa. I mean, and of course now with Bryce Young, it's like, dude, figure it out. Figure out a way to get this kid on the field and make an impact. Right? And that's why we're paying you X amount of dollars. That's basically what that's what you get hired to do, to take studs like this and get them ready to go. Now, the good news for Al Washington is he doesn't have to force the issue with Bryce Young. He doesn't have to play him more than maybe he's ready to play. Or the other way to look at it is he can bring him along a little bit slower, meaning he doesn't have to give him 50 snaps on the road in College Station right now. I mean, that you don't need him to do that. If he can give you 10, you know, bull in a china shop snaps, cool.
Yeah.
And then you're good to go. And then eventually maybe he earns more. But if you're Coach Washington, you got to be sitting there pinching yourself saying, I've got RJ Oben and Josh Burnham. That's exciting enough. But now I got this young pup to work with. Dude, figure it out. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, that's my theme for the day. Figure it out. I mean, you got studs. Go get production. And you know what? That's exactly what Al Washington did last year at the defensive end position. You know what? I mean, it was a big question mark going into the season, Vince. One of the biggest. I mean, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, he's never been a starter. He's never been in a regular. He's been a rotation guy. Nano Safa-Mensah, like, what's he going to give you? And guess what? Al Washington coached him up, figured it out, went out and got production at a top 10 D-line last year. Hey, you know what? How are you going to replace Isaiah Foskey? I mean, right now we're talking about how are they going to replace Javonte Jean-Baptiste and Nana Safa-Mensah. Last year we were talking about how are you going to replace Isaiah Foskey and Jason Adamiola and Justin Adamiola and Chris Smith and Jacob Lacey. There was a lot more questions about who you're going to replace last year than there are this year. And you've got some really talented players now stepping into that mix. And that's why you kind of get excited about what they can and should be.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, figure it out. And then you look at the rest of them. Logan Thomas, I've heard some great things about. Super athletic. I had someone tell me like he's fast, and I was like, yeah, I know. And he said, no, you don't know. I'm not talking about fast for a defensive lineman. No. I'm talking about he's just fast. He's one of our fastest players. Period. Yeah. And that's a 225-pound defensive lineman. Love what he's bringing to the table. He's probably a year away. You know, maybe he can find a third down, just rush the quarterback role. But even at 225, Vince, that's pretty light for a kid that's about 6'5", almost 6'5". You know, there's some left tackles that just can get a little shot to the ribs, and he's out. You know, he's probably a year away, but super athletic kid. Sean Sevillano, I think, is a guy that has a chance to help out this year. Has a chance to step in and say, hey, look, I'm going to give you some goal line snaps at 320 plus. I'm going to give you some short yardage snaps at 320 plus. He's a guy that I think can help you out. And I've heard some great things about Cole Mullins as well. But I think Bryce Young and Sean Sevillano are the two that give you the most chance to help you out in year one. Because we talk about how, you know, unique Bryce Young is, but Sean Sevillano is just something you don't have anywhere else. And that's just beef. major beef. Yeah. You just don't have anybody else at 6'1", 320 plus. And he's lost 20 pounds to get down to 320. You know what I mean? So you just don't have a lot of that, Vince. And you need it. Like, you don't necessarily need that on 1st and 10 at the minus 35, but there's definitely situations where you need that. You know, and I think he's going to have a chance to handle that role this season and give them that, you know, that change up. Like, think about it. If you're trying to block Howard Cross for 2 series, and you try to block, you know, Donovan Heinisch, and they bring Howard Cross back, and then all of a sudden the next series, after you're chasing these 280-pound twitchy guys, you're like, now I got to block that freaking guy? Are you seriously? It's a completely different dynamic that you got to.
And that's huge. Be able to throw different types of bodies at guys and different types of defense. Frankly, you can call a defense a different way when you have these different body styles and stuff in the middle. And so it just kind of opens up the playbook a little bit for you. If he can, you know, work his way into the rotation and do the things that he needs to do. And again, you're not talking 20 to 25 snaps a game. You're talking 5 to 10 snaps a game, you know, where he can help you out.
Agree.
That's going to do it for this edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We had great viewership today, which is awesome. Thanks for hanging out with us. And, some of that was probably
I'd like to say it's because people are ready for the season, but we all know what it was about.
But they hung out the entire time. That's the key right there, Brian. They hung out.
Hey, everybody that's in here new. We're here every day. So,
yep, every day.
If you're late to the show, we talked about the Charles Jagasaw stuff way at the beginning of the show.
Yep.
And before we jumped into our defensive line stuff. And
it'll be out in podcast form here momentarily. So, hold on to your britches.
Yeah, you're going to get the Jagasaw stuff up now, and then the D-line stuff will be up tomorrow morning.
Yep. Correct. So thanks for hanging out with us. Really appreciate it. Tune in tonight. We'll have IB Nation Sports Talk at 5:00. And then tomorrow, Brian and I will be back at it, and we will have a practice report because we will be at practice in the morning, and we will let you know what we see. And then we will move into linebackers. And so we're going to break down the linebacking core tomorrow. So it should be a lot of fun. So make sure you join us again tomorrow at 1:00 because we'll be here. Will you? That's the question. Make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, the notification bell, share with your family and friends, jump on the boards at irishbreakdown.com. If you just can't wait till 1:00 for us to give you the verbal version of practice, get on the boards and you'll get it instantaneously. I mean, that's all I can say. So you want to make sure you get over there. That's where you get the breaking news. That's where you get all the insights and everything. So make sure you get on there. Join the family. We'd love to have you. So boards.irishbreakdown.com. So for Brian, I'm Vince, and we will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown podcast.